Hi everyone, Dr. Blied here, and I want to share some important new research that is helping us to rethink what we often assume about autism and specifically about the timing of diagnosis. An international study led by researchers at the University of Cambridge examined genetic and developmental data from tens of thousands of autistic people across multiple countries. The researchers asked a key question. Does autism that is identified early in childhood follow the same developmental and genetic patterns as autism that's identified later in life? So you all know that recently I shared with you my daughter's autism and ADHD diagnosis at 6 years old, and I shared with you my late identification of both at closer to 40 years old. And so what's going on with why that occurs, why some people are diagnosed and recognized so early, but then we still have 80% of females, girls and women, individuals assigned female at birth, who are still undiagnosed by the time they reach adulthood. This research kind of gives us a little lens into that. Researchers are very clear that access, awareness, bias, and I will add clinician knowledge or lack of knowledge and training does absolutely play a major role in when someone is diagnosed. There are long wait lists, inequities in healthcare, clinician bias, stigma, racism, and masking that all continue to delay recognition for many autistic individuals. These systemic barriers are real and they are deeply impactful. What this study adds is not a replacement for those experiences, but it adds an additional layer of our understanding. Alongside these systemic barriers, the research suggests that there are also different developmental patterns that tend to unfold across childhood and adolescence. Autism can become more visible at different points in development as expectations change and as people's nervous systems interact with their environment over time. For some children, differences in social communication are noticeable very early. So, what does this mean? Families can observe differences in play. I shared with you all how, with my child, we noticed that something that was fun for her was lining up the Kirkland soda water cans, which have different colors, line them on all up by color, and then lining up toys in different categories. And that was fun play. Other families may notice that their children play very repetitively with their toys. Maybe they have a rich imagination, but the stories and the scenes that that child sets up with their dolls or their action figures tend to be the same from day to day. For example, they may also notice differences in language development, meaning delayed expressive language, for example, where the child is talking later than usual, babbling later than usual, and so on with those expressive or receptive understanding language, or differences in social engagement during those preschool years. So perhaps the child is shy or introverted, which we often label autistic kids as, or maybe they don't have social motivation and they're just more interested in playing by themselves. That's more of a stereotypical presentation where the child is in their own little world. What you'll often see in non-stereotypical presentation, often female presentations, is that the child is very socially motivated, wants to have friends, but has a lot of difficulty connecting with same age peers. They may do great with peers that are much, much younger than them or much, much older than them, particularly if they are also gifted. But that same age is where there's some difficulties that will arise. These early emerging support needs are often easier for adults to recognize and professionals to recognize, which can lead to earlier evaluation and, importantly, earlier access to supports. For other autistic children, however, early development may not raise the same level of concern. These individuals may meet developmental milestones on time or even early. They may have very strong verbal ability. They may have co-occurring ADHD, which will mask or overshadow a lot of their autistic features, because although they have difficulty with understanding the rules and the norms of social communication, so they're not having a back and forth conversation, they're more talking to you about their interests and then disengaging when the conversation is no longer about their interest. Because they are talking, you don't notice that there are those social communication differences and challenges that are there. Or the individual may put significant effort into adapting to expectations. And you see this a lot with individuals who are socialized as female to fit in, to, not break the mold, to please authority figures. And unfortunately, that also contributes to folks getting missed from early diagnosis. However, as social relationships become more complex, we especially see this in those middle school years when the rules and the norms of socializing become more and more nuanced, and they're rapidly changing. As emotion regulation gets tested in new ways, challenges may begin to surface. The study also found that autistic people who are diagnosed later, on average, tend to have co-occurring neurodevelopmental differences, such as ADHD, as I mentioned before, with that diagnostic overshadowing. People just see the one diagnosis and miss the other one, as well as higher rates of anxiety, depression, and trauma-related stress. This does not mean that ADHD or autism causes these other experiences. Instead, it suggests that later diagnosis often comes with a much heavier mental health load. It is shaped by many factors, including long-term stress, unmet support needs, and years of masking, which is exhausting and does eventually, for many people, lead to burnout, whether it be in college or their jobs, or when they get married and start to have kids. We start to see things unravel and fall apart after years and years of masking and compensating and just trying to fit in into environments that aren't yet shaped and molded to best fit and nurture their unique brain styles. Now, genetics add another important layer. The researchers found that many small common variations in DNA called single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs, together explain about 11% of why some people are diagnosed with autism earlier or later than others. Each of these DNA differences has a very small effect on its own, but taken together, they make a modest but meaningful contribution to diagnostic timing. This genetic influence is about the same as other single factors, such as social-related influences and health-related influences. Most of the timing of diagnosis is shaped by many factors working together over time, showing that it's not just nature or nurture, but it's the combination of both biology and environment that do matter. They also found that autism-related genetics don't follow a single pattern. I think we knew this, right? Because if you met one autistic person, you have met one autistic person. There's so much variability within the spectrum. Instead, there are overlapping genetic influences. One genetic pattern is more closely linked with autism that is diagnosed earlier and is associated with greater social communication differences in early childhood. Another pattern is more closely linked with autism that's diagnosed later and is associated with increased emotional and behavior challenges over time, with greater overlap with the genetics of ADHD and certain mental health difficulties. So this doesn't mean that there are two kinds of autism. Like, we never want to oversimplify it in that way. Instead, it's important to understand that autism exists along a continuum with multiple developmental pathways that are shaped by the interaction between genetics and environment over time. And when I say continuum, I don't mean like a linear continuum, like less autistic to more autistic to, from you're not going to get diagnosed until adulthood because your support needs are mild but significant and highly masked to your support needs are very high and obvious and you're going to be diagnosed in early childhood. That's not what I'm talking about, because what we understand now, it is not a simple linear spectrum or continuum. Instead, you can think about autism like a pizza pie where each autism feature has a slice of the pie. So there are social communication differences, there are language and communication differences, there are sensory processing differences. Some people are sensory seeking, some people are sensory sensitive. And depending on the sense and what's happening, it can be different. And then there are also differences in emotional responses. And so each person will have more or less of each slice. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the autism spectrum and continuum and individual differences in those variations. So this research has meaningful implications for families, for educators, and for clinicians, and for the everyday person as well. It challenges the idea that autism is something that you either see very early or you miss entirely. Some autistic individuals don't stand out until expectations increase, socially, emotionally, academically, or vocationally. That means we, as clinicians, as professionals, and as family members, and as a society, we need to remain attentive across development, not just in the early years. It also reminds us to look beyond academic performance and outward behavior patterns and pay closer attention to an individual's emotional well-being, their regulation, and their responses to distress. Early success and high achievement does not always mean that things are easy internally. Can I get an amen? This is especially important for children who are more likely to be overlooked, including many girls and individuals assigned female at birth, students of color, individuals of color, and children whose strengths can mask how much effort they are using to cope, including those twice exceptional and gifted students. Many later diagnosed autistic people have spent years adapting themselves to environments and to systems that were never designed with them in mind. TLDR. So too long didn't read. Long story short, here's my conclusion. Autism is not a single story with a single timeline. It reflects many developmental journeys that are shaped by biology and environment and relationships and access to quality care. When we expand how and when we look for autism, we create more opportunities for people to be understood, accepted, and supported in ways that genuinely honor who they are. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. I know this was a super long video, and I so look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take really good care.